We're going to have all of the physicians who've spoken this morning join us, and we also have a couple of brave patients who are going to share their experiences here. So, why don't you briefly, I'm going to have the patients go first. We have on the stage there Judy Wang and also Barbara Mig, who are going to kind of share their experience with glaucoma treatments in terms of what medications you've taken, what procedures did you undergo, and let's start off with that. So why don't we start off with Judy?
Okay. Good morning, guys. It's probably mic'd up. Sounds like I'm projecting well. I wrote some notes down of, I'll start with the kind of my glaucoma journey. I got diagnosed in my 30s, um, out of just getting my eye checked. So certainly promote anybody to get their eye checked regularly. And then by that time, I already had pretty progressive glaucoma. So I started with SLT 2 times, eye drops, number of them. Can't remember all the brands. But I know beta blocker was not great for me because I had low blood pressure, especially at night. And as I learned more about glaucoma, that, we do actually have, or I have, I don't know what everybody has, but higher IOP at night. And so if I have low blood pressure in conjunction, it's not great. So that's one of the traits I would like to encourage everyone is just to be curious with your disease. I really have found that GRF has been very helpful, just to learn about various different things about the disease. So those are the eye drops, those are the SLTs, and then I went into Canada to have a InFocus, which is a product that's not FDA approved in the United States as a surgery, as my first surgery. And I had to seek a second doctor's opinion on that. So I'm just sharing my journey is that I think a second opinion is always good. And that was a successful surgery. Unfortunately, I scar over my eyes, so that had probably just a year of efficacy, a year of efficiency. And then I had a serious surgery, which is the Trebek. That was my second surgery. And through it all, is a lot of us probably are afraid of our eyesight being gone. And for me, I feel like my faith has carried me a lot through that time and through this time now. And I definitely encourage that. And just to be grateful for my eye doctor. He was a very caring eye doctor. So even though, again, I scarred over that, it was a very, it's wonderful that I had him as a doc. So, but so far, even though I scarred, I changed another doc, which made my eye actually stabilize in terms of its IOP. So those are my two eye surgeries. And since then, being involved with GRF and being a donor here, I've found out more about kind of the clinical trials that are in place. So I've qualified for a clinical trial at Stanford using insulin as an eye drop. So I did that for about a short time, and I'm hoping to qualify for the third. And that's another thing with the curiosity or the proactiveness I think I would encourage is to keep looking for new innovative ways, things that are being developed. So clinicaltrials.gov is a website that is readily available to look through. So those are a couple of my surgeries, eye drops, clinical trial. I know there's also a vitamin trial that's ongoing. It's called the nicotinamide trial. And I also volunteer in that and participate in that. So those are a couple of the surgical experiences or history of mine.
Thank you, Judy, for sharing that. You've covered pretty well the morning treatment
Right.
options out there pretty well. Barbara, why don't you tell us your story and journey?
Greetings, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This was my first summit. And I think for me, I'm finally following Judy's great advice of pushing forward, being more curious, exploring more options. I share some experiences with Judy in that learning in my 20s of pretty high pressures, monitored those for a while, and now I have taken eye drops for about 25 years. Similar, not really sure at this point. All of the ones that have been part of my history, but really glad for continued care with the same doctor for more than 20 years so that there was that consistency. But I think the advice to be documenting on my own is excellent advice from this morning. So about 10 years ago, I also had a procedure. I know many in the room raised their hand for the LST. And then I had about 6 years ago cataract surgery. So that was really a vehicle for having an eye stent in order to reduce pressures. I do continue to take 4 drops per eye per day. So it hasn't been the case that the procedures have resulted in a decrease in the drops that I'm taking. I have been fortunate that I seem to tolerate the drops fairly well, and have integrated that into my life and travel. And like many of you probably have strategies for how you always have spare bottles available. So you kind of adjust which ones you use so that you have some, so that you're able to travel with a backup plan as well. For me, I think, as I mentioned, attending the summit is maybe a bit like being at an amusement park. I've always been drawn to the tilt-a-whirl. Does anybody know the tilt-a-whirl? You get on, you take a couple of people with you, and it both moves up and down a bit and twirls. So just about when you're ready to focus on something, it shifts a little bit. But I think I've kind of been on one ride at the amusement park, and I think that the experience here and connecting with many of you and learning about a variety of options is going to help me get off the tilt-a-whirl and try a few other options for me. I think that's probably enough to share.
Thanks very much, Barbara. Appreciate that. So again, this is a great opportunity for all of you. If you have questions, submit them with the QR code or the question cards on your table as we continue this morning. I have a few questions from the audience already that I'm going to kind of toss at at our panelists here. Based on what Judy was saying earlier about having low blood pressure and is that an issue with glaucoma patients? Somebody had asked about, I'm a low tension glaucoma patient with a low heart rate and low blood pressure. Should I stay away from drops which contain beta blockers? I was on Combigan for quite some time and then switched off. So Manisha, you want to tackle that?
Sure, absolutely. So most of the time with low tension patients, we know that there's a lack of blood flow up to that optic nerve. So if your heart rate is low to begin with, or if you have a low blood pressure, then what we call a perfusion pressure, that's the pressure indicated to push that blood up to the eye, to provide oxygen to the eye, it's low. And so anything that's going to slow down the heart rate or anything that's going to decrease that blood and therefore the oxygen going up to the eye, to the optic nerve, we tend to try to avoid. Now, part of taking one, I think you were on, did they say they were on a combination drop or just with
Combination?
Yeah, so there is some thought that some of the medications out there, specifically alpha agonists, have this neuroprotective effect for the optic nerve. But I would say I would stay away from a beta blocker in this situation unless there's a specific reason your doctor wanted you to be on it that is going to lower the perfusion pressure and therefore potentially quicken the damage of that optic nerve. There's probably better options out there.
Brian, you mentioned that there's this kind of new movement and even a society based on interventional glaucoma. Um, you mentioned about Durista. Are there other kind of sustained delivery drugs available in glaucoma? I know there's some outside of glaucoma that we're already using, but what about glaucoma? Is there potential to get drugs delivered to the eye without using eye drops?
We're at a very lucky time period because on the coattails of Durista, which was approved in about 2019, 2020, just a few months ago, we received approval for something truly innovative, and that's something called iDose. iDose, unlike Durista, which it contains 4 months worth of medication, iDose contains about 3 years worth of medication. This is an actual reservoir that looks somewhat similar to a really big eye stent that we put in the eye, very similar to the way we put in an eye stent. But because it contains 3 years worth of medication that is slowly released into the eye, the goal is to basically replace the latanoprost or the Lumigan or the travoprost for those 3 years. This was just approved just a couple of months ago. And right now, our biggest barrier with actually using it and offering it to patients is that we kind of have to fight with the insurance companies, but we're all working on that. And we all believe, at least the community at large believes, that this is a worthwhile fight for us to have. And I'm hopeful that a lot of you will have the opportunity to have that implanted into your eyes to at least replace the one medication for up to 3 years.
Thank you. And Tom, there are a couple of people that had questions about clinical trials. One was, how can I participate in a clinical trial? And do I need to talk to my eye doctor before participating in a clinical trial?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's several resources available to you. I would always suggest using your eye doctor as a resource. So a lot of times the doctors themselves will know of some of the latest and greatest trials that are taking place. So I would start there. If you want to venture out and do a little bit of research on your own, I think it was mentioned checking clinicaltrials.gov. Because that will list all the active clinical trials that are going on, although I'll say it can be a little bit difficult to navigate sometimes and to truly understand what is entailed. The other thing is if you happen to live near an academic center, a university with an ophthalmology department, they might be worth contacting as well, because oftentimes they may be participating in trials, or they might at least have contacts or resources to help you know who will be participating in trials. I do want to just make one point that I think is really important to understand about clinical trials, especially on the tails of my talk about stem cell therapy. And that is that I would certainly and absolutely run the idea of participating in a trial by your ophthalmologist. And it's important to understand a few things about how clinical trials are done responsibly. Usually clinical trials are sponsored by either companies or universities, but they always have to be overseen by something called an Institutional Review Board, or IRB. And that is for the protection of the patients, to make sure that the thing being studied has good rationale and is more likely to benefit them than it is to hurt them, because not all studies work. And the other thing is very, very few clinical trials will charge patients money to participate. I actually am not aware of any, but I don't want to say there are none. Usually patients will be given compensation for their time. The reason I bring this up is because there are places, it used to be in other countries, but unfortunately it's now true even in the United States, that have programs that claim to be participating in a clinical trial. And some of them are for transplantation of stem cells into the eye. And I will say that the ones I'm aware of are unproven technologies. And there have been well-documented papers in journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, where patients have paid $15,000 to be part of a clinical trial in Florida to have stem cells injected in their eyes. And then the stem cell caused either an infection or a retinal detachment and took away the last little bit of vision that they. So I say that just so that everyone's aware, especially if you're excited about things like stem cells, that participating in clinical trials is important. It's a fantastic opportunity, and it's something that I would encourage all patients to do. But it's important to be well informed about the risks and benefits and to know what you're getting into. And I think speaking with your ophthalmologist is an absolutely fantastic best start.
Yeah, fabulous
Could I add a little
outline
bit
there.
to that?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Do you mind if I add?
Sure, no, go ahead.
Just, I guess, my own journey again. Stanford is a very well established institution, and some of the things, Dr. Johnson, you talked about is certainly, takes place, and I feel very blessed to be part of that trial within Stanford. And since then, I've gotten to speak with several other administrators, principal investigator of other research institutions that are big into eye and the type of clinical trials that they hold. So I think, again, me being proactive is part of the soft skills I was talking about that are established, and what trials that they have is the way that I've gone about, in addition to the clinicaltrials.gov, to look for trials that are taking place.
Sometimes there's not any great answer, but for our two patients, Judy and Barb, how many times did you have SLT done in one eye?
For me, just one.
One?
In each eye, and my right eye does not seem to respond well, and so there is concern. I don't know the specific medical connection to the concern for the damage on the right optic nerve, but in general, concern about any changes for that eye. Seems to respond with very high pressure.
And I've had 2 in each eye.
So one of the questions was, how many times can I have an SLT done?
I'll take this one. SLT is a very interesting procedure, but it is not always created equally. Everybody's anatomy is a little bit different. Everybody's trabecular meshwork, which is the tissue that we actually target with the laser, looks different. And everybody's tissue responds differently. Generally, we can repeat SLT multiple times, hoping that we get more effect the second time around. However, typically a lot of us, and I imagine we're probably consistent, is that if somebody has it twice and doesn't respond, they're typically a non-responder. One thing that I will bring up that I think is worth talking about from an innovation standpoint is that there's a change to SLT that may be coming to market shortly. The FDA just approved a new type of SLT called the DSLT, or direct SLT. And this is a product that is now owned by Alcon. It was previously owned by a company called Belkin. And whereas with conventional SLT, we are directly visualizing the trabecular meshwork, and we as the surgeons are pushing the button when we're looking at the red dot on the trabecular meshwork, DSLT takes an image of the eye without any lens touching you, and it can automatically track where it suspects your trabecular meshwork is, and it delivers the energy externally. This is nothing that has been done in Philadelphia yet, but the product has just been approved, and I anticipate within the next year, there will be some clinics that start to have it. I'm going to try and have it the day that I can, and I imagine that big institutions will as well.
Thank you. Even though we've had something like SLT around for years, we're still learning how it works and also how to apply it. So one question here is that my pressures have been controlled, being 16 to 18 on drops and multiple SLTs, but my vision continues to worsen in both eyes. Why am I getting worse? And kind of as a second question on top of that, how often should you have your pressure checked after being diagnosed? So I'm gonna ask the physicians about that first, and then I'm gonna go to our patients about that. So anybody want to Manisha, you want to tackle that?
That's a good question. Every day, or at least once a week, I have someone that's probably in this situation. It's very challenging. It's frustrating for you and for me, for us. In that situation, we have to rethink, what more can we be doing? Maybe the pressures were good at one point, and 16 to 17 sounds wonderful. But what if this person in question has an advanced loss of the optic nerve, and now the goal pressures need to be even lower? So it may be that at one point something was working well, and if there's continued progression of the disease, then we have to consider potentially be even more aggressive and targeting pressures that are even lower, single digits even at times. So this can be a real challenge. This is also a real challenge for our low tension patients who sometimes seem to progress at pressures of 10. I mean, can you believe that? But yes, it truly does happen. So then we start to think, well, maybe our pressures need to be lower. We need to be doing other therapies. And this is where that whole interventional mindset really does come in. Maybe the target tissues that our drops and our SLTs are directed at are no longer responding in the manner in which they were responding 10 to 20 years ago. So this is when we start considering surgical options, minimally invasive options to lower the pressure even more in hopes to prevent that progression from continuing.
So, Brian, there is another question about, hey, is the pressure seems to be highest at a certain time of the day, and is there an issue about maybe missing high pressures, even if it seems to be okay in the office, and how often should you check the pressure and when?
As was mentioned, there is this diurnal fluctuation as we talk about, where in general, the intraocular pressure tends to be the highest overnight and first thing in the morning, tends to be lowest sort of mid-afternoon and towards the evening. So when I see somebody like this patient who, let's say 16 to 18 is what their goal pressure is, and they're always seen at 8 o'clock in the morning every time that they have their visit, that's the type of person who the next time I see them, I'll say, you know what, you're coming back. You're my last appointment the next time you come in. I'm going to see you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And sometimes we truly capture them and their pressure is 27. And now we think they've been controlled all along. And every day they're spiking to the mid-20s, which is not safe for them. The other thing is that sometimes we can't capture a high pressure in the office because we're not at somebody's house in the middle of the night when their pressure is spiking. And this is where innovation is helpful as well. And eye care is one of the exhibitors out there, and I'd encourage you to talk to them. They have a device called Eye Care Home. Does anyone here have an Eye Care Home or have used it? Did you guys capture higher measurement?
So, Judy, how did that help you? Was it helpful?
Yeah, so I got the eye care because coming to GRF's San Francisco event, the annual event, and eye care had a booth out there, and my husband, who's my lovely caregiver, said, hey, check out this unit. And so my doctor, Dr. Baker in Columbus, sold it in the sense that I bought the unit, but I had to buy it from the doctor's office. And at first I got really neurotic with it and took it all the time. And so every time you take a pressure, the pressure's recorded and it's given to the doc. So like you said, all times of the day, different, maybe you're doing yoga, maybe after yoga you want to see what it was like, maybe meditation, you want to see what it's like. But anyway, just to answer your question, that's how I got the eye care. But I had some other comments, but just to answer your eye care question, that's how I got it.
It's a helpful device because it can show you, it's an at-home way to measure your own pressure. And for people who are invested enough in their care, which every single one of you in this room is because you've self-selected yourselves to be here, it's a worthwhile thing to just know what your pressure does throughout the day. And it's very helpful for us as well because it gives us not just a snapshot measurement of what your pressure is, but a more long-term measurement. Kind of like how blood pressure may be really good at home, but it's high at the doctor's office, white coat syndrome. We like to know more data when it comes to pressures.
Yeah, I totally agree. We have a clinical research program at Wilmer, where we're studying and answering very specific clinical questions about the use of home tonometry in taking care of patients with glaucoma. And in a series of patients where we had their home eye care data, we found that 30% of them were exceeding their target pressure by at least 5 millimeters of mercury every single day that they had it at home. And so there's a lot of, I think, uncontrolled or suboptimally controlled pressure that we as doctors are just totally unaware of. We're calling it occult pressure fluctuations now because they're happening at 4 in the morning or 11 at night when the patient's never going to be in your office. And so it's not always necessary for every patient, but I think there are a lot of patients where it would be useful to have that information and take better care of it.
So, Tom, I'm going to kind of throw it back in your lap here and ask you, you have eye care tonometer at home, your pressure's always super low, and you're still getting worse with really low pressures. And you can't really get it any lower safely. Those patients do exist, we think, out there.
Yeah.
Would we agree? And so I understand a lot of the research you're talking about is futuristic, and you have to have good clinical data eventually to justify using it. But is there something out there that patients can use that you would say, yeah, you might as well try this. It's safe and it's available. You got nothing to lose. Is there anything out there that you'd recommend?
Well, it's a complicated question because I will say what we're talking about here is what we in the field term neuroprotective therapies. These are basically a new class of medicines that are supposed to make the optic nerve more resilient to pressure in a manner that doesn't actually lower the pressure itself. Sometimes that can be done through increasing blood flow. Sometimes that just signals directly to those nerve cells themselves and makes them hardier or more likely to survive. And this has been a topic of scientific research for 30 years. And very few things have actually gotten to the stage of clinical trial, unfortunately. And it's interesting because 15 years ago, there was a major clinical trial of a drug called memantine that is used to treat Alzheimer's disease. And the idea was maybe it would also be applicable to glaucoma. And the trial involved almost 1,000 patients over multiple years, and it cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And at the end of the day, it did not show a beneficial effect. And so for the next 10 years, there was a lot of concern and worry and consternation about funding large clinical trials for neuroprotective therapy. But to get back to this idea that we're in a very exciting time, in addition to new surgeries and new devices coming out, we're in sort of a renaissance of neuroprotection coming down the pipeline. So what I will say to directly answer your question is there's one thing right now that's available, and that is nicotinamide or vitamin B3, which is a molecule. It's a vitamin. It's available. You can go to your health food store and buy it as a supplement. And it's supposed to improve the energy metabolism of retinal ganglion cells to make them more resilient, less likely to die in glaucoma. It has very, very strong evidence in the laboratory for its work in preventing optic nerve damage in mice and rats and animal models and things, such that it really seems like the pathway and the target are viable. And based on that data, very large clinical trials have been started at 4 different places in the world: in Australia, England, at Columbia, in New York, and in Sweden. And so for a long time, I was telling patients in this particular condition that this may be something you want to consider, because I don't need to write a prescription for it. You can walk to your grocery store, get some vitamin B3, and for vitamins, we generally think that there's low harm involved. Now, the reason I'm hedging my bets here a little bit is that just in the last month and a half, it was published that one patient in the trial at Columbia developed liver damage that they think is from the nicotinamide. And now this is very, very high doses of nicotinamide. The dose used in the studies is 3 grams per day. I think the highest you can buy it is 500 milligrams. So you have to be taking 6 tablets a day to achieve that dose. But since I learned about that particular adverse event in that clinical trial, I've been much more cautious to recommend it. And I think if anybody is interested in trying it, it may be a viable thing, but I would certainly recommend it to your ophthalmologist and have a conversation about whether it's a good idea. And your ophthalmologist may want to consider monitoring liver function while trial.
Thank you. And just a quick survey in the audience. How many of you, in addition to the conventional therapies that your doctor tells you to use or take medicines or laser, how many of you are doing something other than that to help your glaucoma? So, there are people out there that are doing something in addition to conventional therapy. My patients would come in sometimes with a bottle and say, "This says glaucoma control, Dr. Katz. Why didn't you tell me about this?" And it's multivitamins. Why are there things on the internet that can say things like, this is specifically will cure glaucoma? We all have the FDA, and it's such a difficult thing to get things through the FDA. Why does that exist?
Yeah, so the FDA very specifically regulates pharmaceutical agents, meaning drugs, but there are a lot of things that can be classified in 2 different ways. And supplements and vitamins are not regulated by the FDA in the same way. So if somebody produces something that is a combination of ginkgo and St. John's wort and something else, the FDA doesn't have to approve or check not only how it's labeled. They can claim to treat or cure glaucoma, but it's not even monitored that what's in the bottle is actually what they claim to have. And there have been reports when people have bought 7 different formulations of St. John's wort and then done laboratory-based analyses with things like mass spectroscopy to determine what's actually in the bottle, and the amount of variation and lack of purity in a lot of those things was kind of concerning. So, it's not to say that vitamins and supplements don't have their place, but a lot of things can be claimed without having reasonable scientific evidence that what the bottle is telling you will actually achieve what it aims to.
Yeah, Judy.
Yeah, I guess I understand Dr. Johnson's point, and I feel, that I'm one of those patients, right? The IOP is fairly well maintained, but my eyesight's still diminishing. So I do incorporate neuroprotection, like you mentioned, and the insulin trial that I qualify for, that's in neuroprotection. I believe the CNTF, which is another product that's recently FDA approved, is also neuroprotection. And I think, my lifestyle, eating right, exercising, all the things that GRF has on their website, meditation, are all helpful. And so I find that I read a lot of PubMed information. I feel like PubMed has pretty good data, and it's not, on Facebook or whatever. That's just it's maybe peer reviewed already. Maybe there's others that are supporting the data, and it is challenging, right, for a drug that doesn't have a biomarker to be approved eventually by FDA. And Dr. Katz, you and I talked about that yesterday. But I feel like me being my own advocate for my own health, for example, in nicotinamide, I take the dosage that's recommended, and I do feel it makes a difference. I do feel all these steps I've taken outside of pure pressure has been helpful for my care.
So there's some difficult questions that some of the audience have raised, like, when do I leave my comprehensive general ophthalmologist and see a glaucoma specialist? When should that be done? And for both Judy and Barb, somebody has said, I've been working with the same glaucoma specialist for more than 20 years. what are the best practices for how long to stay with the same physician and recommendations as to when and how to break up? It's kind of like a marriage. It's really, you know somebody for a lot of years but sometimes there's an issue that comes up. What do you decide that there's a breakup?
Glad to jump in. I think for me, I am at that point. I had, as I mentioned, the same ophthalmologist for at least 20 years, 25 years, and now have someone new. And we've had great conversations, much debate over some of the procedures. And so I think it's time for me to be making that exploration and research.
I guess through my journey, right, from Canada to Trebek to Dr. Goldberg, I've had several different docs, and I find that a doc that's MD, PhD is interesting, education in the sense that they spend time in the lab in addition of being MD. So maybe they're more up to date with the latest technology, not to say only MDs are not. And yes, I think someone with experience for me is important. So for me, I've decided to take second opinions, and so I don't have a date when I think it's time to break up, but
It's complicated, I understand. And, as my colleagues would probably agree that when you go with the same problem to 3 different ophthalmologists, you may get 3 different approaches. It's not necessarily that, one is the only correct approach. So for example, Brian, I'm going to throw you back in here with the whole interventional glaucoma approach, because somebody said here or asked, why should I choose surgery over eye drops?
Yeah, actually, over the break, somebody said to me, can I just take eye drops for the rest of my life? The answer is yeah. I have no problem with that. The reality is that second opinions can be extraordinarily helpful. I never mind if a patient leaves my office and goes and gets another opinion. I think it's really helpful to get that. On the flip side, going to a place where we're becoming too invested in second opinions and having too many cooks in the kitchen can make it very difficult to follow a linear glaucoma journey. And this is one of the challenges that I would see in certain places that I worked institutionally, where there was sort of a rotating cast of characters of doctors. Maybe it's a residency program or a fellowship where there's a little bit more turnover. When you get a diagnosis of glaucoma, it sticks with you for life. And sometimes it's hard to peel that diagnosis away. And if you're in that same institution but seen by a bunch of different people and new medications are tacked on, it's really hard to pull them away. And getting another opinion from a completely outside institution with a fresh set of eyes can be really helpful to sort of hit that reset button and decide, what is the stage of glaucoma? Is this glaucoma? And what is the best next step? So second opinions are helpful, but also finding a happy marriage and following through on a journey with somebody is also really helpful.
So Monisha, there are a number of people that have raised issues about medications with side effects, whether they're dry eye, droopy lid. Somebody wants to know why we have droopy lids sometimes with certain eye drops. So and somebody asked why, they were told that Byzolta that they're taking, every morning, that they should have been taking in the evening. When do you take drops? Why is it important, like with prostaglandins, like Byzolta? And when to use preservative-free medications? Is that something that we should be using, and who should be using that?
Yeah, this is the complicated part about medical glaucoma management. There are so many options. And this is why I had mentioned in my talk that there are certain medications that are probably better for certain people than there are for others. I really think it comes down to, what your doctor and you think may have worked best for you, or you kind of tried medications and some may have worked, some may haven't worked. Some people may have lifestyles where a nighttime drop is more suitable for them versus a morning drop. So really, the medications are dosed in a way that's going to make them most effective for you. And of course, there are some side effects that are going to come along for the ride. And this really comes down to whether or not the side effect can be tolerable. Some are just going to always be there. There's nothing we can do to really remove that. And this is where it kind of ties back into that whole, when you seek a second opinion, you have to establish this trust with your physician. And if you feel like you have a trust with them, you should be able to tell them, say, you know what, I know you've been happy with my pressures and you're so happy every time I come in, but I am miserable on this medication. I don't like the way my eye looks with it. I hate that people comment on it. You should have every single right to tell your physician that you don't feel comfortable taking a certain medication, or maybe you don't like taking a nighttime versus a morning. I think that open communication with your physician is so important, because this is a journey that not you are on your own, but we as your physicians, we are on it with you. And if you don't tell us what might be bothering you about your eye, or what might be bothering you about a medication, whether it's a side effect or a cost, we're not going to know. And we're just going to keep, we have 50 other people we're seeing, and it's just how it is. Glaucoma is so much more prevalent. We are all seeing more and more patients every day. We want to see that your pressure is good, that you're doing well. We want to check in on your life, your family, and then, we want to move on to the next person because we have to. But if you tell us that, this is not working for me, your doctor's going to most likely take the time and really consider that into the equation and really say, well, this is not working. Let's change the medication, or let's just not do a medication. Let's try laser. Maybe surgery is a better option. So again, it comes down to, a long kind of answer to your question, Dr. Katz, but having that ability to really talk to your physician personally and tell them what may be really bothering you, so that we can really target maybe a better approach for you. And I think that's going to lead to likely a better result in the long run.
So this is a two-part question now. First, for our physician panelists here, can trabeculectomy be repeated, or filtering surgery, and how often will you do it? And then for our patients, when do you say, I've had enough, I'm not doing anymore?
So yes, trabeculectomy can be repeated. When we talk about the eye, it's like real estate. So location, location, location. Most of our approach tends to be where we start from the inside of the eye and work our way out to some of the larger operations that Dr. Schaefer mentioned. But you can have I've done 2 trabeculectomies in patients myself. I don't do that as much anymore with now the advent and all the innovative technologies that we have. But yes, it can be done. And what do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that someone like Dr. Katz, who throughout his career had fewer angle-based surgeries or smaller surgeries that I kind of grew up with, I'm sure you've done a lot more of that than I have. But it is doable, and their trabeculectomy is an anatomical change to the eye, and you can go back and try and get it to work again, but it's not without risk, and it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does.
Well, so the question is, when do we say it's enough? Well, I think we all know it's a chronic disease, and we can't really stop, right? We have to be back to being hopeful and being grateful and being persistent and having a faith and being curious and keep looking, right? And as we see, there's a lot of eye drops, there's a lot of surgery options, there's neuroprotection that's taking place, there's a lot of new technologies. That's what makes it very hopeful, so that it's not only surgery, and there's other options out there. So certainly there's never an enough point, because otherwise, you go blind.
Judy and Barbara, somebody asked me, and I think you touched on it a little bit, both of you, to some extent. How do you stay positive? It's a tough disease. You're kind of stuck with the disease that doesn't go away. And how do you stay positive throughout all this?
I think for me, that's quite straightforward. I can see, and I'm deeply grateful for the science and the options that I do have, and would add to your question, reflecting on when would you stop, or would agree, I don't see a stop. And while I have had glaucoma for X number of years, potentially 30, right? There's this subjective component to when you actually have it. I'm only halfway there statistically. So I need options for 30 more years. So thank you for everything that you're doing. That's a long time. So I see me in a situation of the question of pacing out those options while balancing not waiting too long so that I avoid additional loss of vision.
Thank you. And, ultimately, this is the question that people always want to know answer to. And I'm going to throw it on to Tom, since he gives great talk on future approaches. When will there be a cure for glaucoma?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. The problem is that we know what we have to achieve in order to cure glaucoma, to restore vision in glaucoma, but we don't necessarily know what all the obstacles are going to be until we get axons into the brain and can direct them where they need to go. And the other thing that I'll tell you is that even if you were to completely replace the optic nerve with a fresh new one, you've still got to control the pressure in the eye, or those new cells are going to succumb to the same fate as the original ones. So, the plumbing role of us glaucoma specialists is not going to go away. But hopefully, I think in years to come, there will be a cure.
Well, that's something to look forward to, and we're all eager to unlock the key for that. So thank you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing and others have been doing as well. And we still need to be plumbers, right? So
That's right.
I'll keep our day jobs. Well, listen, we're going to close this session, and please go out and enjoy a nice, nutritious, delicious lunch and refreshments. You're welcome to come back in here, obviously, to sit in the auditorium for lunch. Say hi to the exhibitors again, and we'll start up at 1:15. So we've got a good hour and 15 minutes. Thank you for all of the panelists, especially our patients who are coming up here and sharing their views. So thank you. And all of you stay here on the panel.